So, picture this scenario for a second. You try to eat fairly well, most days.
Right.
You make it to the gym a couple of times a week, or at least you go for a walk.
Yeah, doing the things you're supposed to do.
Exactly. You might even have a relatively flat stomach, and you certainly don't think of yourself as someone with, like, a hidden, simmering health condition.
Oh, absolutely. That's so common.
But there is this quiet frustration a lot of people feel. It's, a tiredness that sleep just doesn't fix, or a sense that your body is holding on to something despite doing everything correctly.
Yeah, that really hits home for a lot of people, I think.
Right. So what if right now there is an invisible metabolically active tissue growing silently inside your abdominal cavity, and it's subtly pulling the strings on how you feel every single day?
Which is a terrifying thought, but it's so accurate.
Yeah.
Because when we think about body fat, I mean, we almost exclusively think about the mirror. We think about the surface level.
Yeah, the stuff we can see.
Exactly, what we can pinch. But if we are only looking at the surface, we're actually looking in completely the wrong place. We miss the hidden mechanisms that actually dictate our daily energy and mood.
Which brings us to today. So our deep dive into the sources today is completely focused on unpacking this hidden dynamic, specifically this epidemic of what's called visceral fat.
It really is an epidemic.
Yeah. Our mission here is to uncover why this specific type of fat is so impactful on your daily health and how it operates under completely different biological rules than the fat we can actually see.
Right. It's totally different.
And we want to explore why the three biggest drivers of this hidden tissue have honestly surprisingly little to do with just counting calories.
Yeah, that's the part that shocks most people.
So we're going to dive into the powerful roles of stress, our sleep cycles, and the specific ways our bodies process sugar.
Well, setting the stage for this requires a fundamental shift in how we visualize the human body, the fat that most people obsess over.
The soft, pinchable layer right under the skin.
Yeah, exactly. That is subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat is an entirely different biological entity. I mean, it sits deep inside your abdominal cavity.
Deep inside.
It is literally packed between your vital organs. It wraps around your liver like a glove, it cushions your kidneys, it presses against your pancreas, and it entwines itself throughout your intestines.
Wow.
You cannot pinch it. You just cannot see it from the outside.
I really want to spend some time on this because to understand why visceral fat is so influential, we have to like completely throw away this outdated idea. A savings account where extra energy just sits around doing nothing.
Oh, far from it.
Yeah.
When you look at the research coming out of places like Harvard Medical School and our sources, scientists now describe visceral fat as acting essentially like its own endocrine gland.
An endocrine gland, meaning it produces hormones.
Exactly. It's a living, highly active tissue. And because it acts like an endocrine gland, it doesn't just sit there. It actively produces hormones, and it continuously pumps out these inflammatory molecules, which biologists call cytokines.
Yeah, I was reading through the list of those cytokines in the source material. It's things like interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and resistin.
Which is a mouthful.
It is, and honestly, they sound like biohazard warnings.
They kind of are.
So if this hidden tissue is constantly pumping these chemicals into my bloodstream right now, like an unwanted rodent who moves in and starts rewiring your house, what is my body actually experiencing on a cellular level?
It's basically experiencing a state of constant low-grade alarm. These chemicals travel directly through your bloodstream, and they start interfering with the whole neighborhood.
Just wrecking the place.
Exactly. When they hit your liver, they disrupt its normal metabolism, confusing how it processes fats and sugars. When they travel through your blood vessels, they cause low-grade arterial inflammation. And that constant scratching of the arterial walls is what the research consistently links to long-term cardiovascular issues. They even cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with insulin signaling in the brain.
Wait, I want to pause on that last part. They cross the blood-brain barrier.
They do.
So this fat in my belly is physically altering the chemistry in my head.
Yes. And that is a massive paradigm shift. When these inflammatory cytokines interfere with brain insulin signaling, it directly impacts your mood, your cognitive function, and your daily energy levels.
That's incredible.
It is literally a physical source for that brain fog people talk about. It can even suppress your overall immune system because your body thinks it's constantly fighting a low-level infection.
That puts a completely different spin on the TOFA phenomenon mentioned in the sources.
Oh, 2FI.
2FI stands for thin outside, fat inside. The data shows that up to 25% of people who have completely normal body mass indexes, meaning they don't look overweight at all, might be carrying dangerously high levels of this visceral fat.
Right. And they're completely unaware of it because they look perfectly fine in clothes.
Mm.
But inside, this inflammatory storm is just brewing.
And if you don't recognize the subtle signs, right, like a slowly expanding waistline, or unexplained bloating, or feeling completely wiped out after a normal meal.
The underlying accumulation just continues quietly in the background.
So we have this rogue, active tissue pumping out biological alarm signals. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. Something is feeding it.
Right.
And the first major driver highlighted in the research is something almost every single person listening to this deals with daily: chronic stress.
Yeah, and this is where the cellular biology gets incredibly specific. Researchers at UC San Francisco have mapped out exactly how this pathway works. Visceral fat cells have a highly dense concentration of cortisol receptors.
Cortisol being our primary stress hormone.
Right. Far more receptors than regular subcutaneous fat under the skin. When you are chronically stressed, your cortisol remains elevated in your bloodstream. That elevated cortisol directly activates a specific enzyme inside the visceral tissue called lipoprotein lipase.
Okay, let's break that down with an analogy, because lipoprotein lipase is a lot. If my body is a nightclub, this enzyme lipoprotein lipase sounds like the biological bouncer at the door who decides where the fat gets to go.
That is a perfect way to look at it. Under normal, low-stress conditions, that bouncer might send dietary fat to your hips or your arms for safe, long-term storage.
Sure, out of the way.
But when cortisol levels are high, cortisol essentially bribes the bouncer. It changes the instructions. The bouncer starts redirecting all that energy straight into the VIP section, which is the deep abdominal cavity around your organs.
But let me look at this from an evolutionary perspective for a second. Cortisol is a survival hormone. It's the chemical that spikes when our ancestors were being chased by a predator.
Yeah.
Why would a survival mechanism tell our bodies to pack fat directly around our vital organs?
Well, it's a brilliant adaptation if you live in the wild. If you are running from a predator or facing a famine, your vital organs need immediate, highly accessible fuel.
Oh, I see.
Storing fat right next to the liver makes evolutionary sense because the liver can quickly convert it into energy for acute, short-term stress.
But we aren't running from predators anymore.
No, and that's the biological mismatch. Modern life is the problem. We are sitting at desks feeling anxious over emails, mortgages, and traffic jams day after day.
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
Right. It's a chronic, simmering stress, not an acute burst. So the cortisol faucet just never shuts off.
So that biological bouncer is just permanently taking bribes, constantly funneling fat into the deep belly. And the sources point out an even more insidious layer to this from researchers at the University of Edinburgh.
This part is wild.
Yeah, visceral fat doesn't just receive cortisol signals, it actually manufactures its own.
Yes. The process is called intracranial cortisol regeneration. It is a stunning discovery. Once visceral fat reaches a certain volume, it begins producing its own local supply of cortisol, totally independent of what your adrenal glands are doing.
It becomes a rogue factory.
Exactly.
It literally prints its own work orders to keep building more of itself, even if you manage to calm down your mind and lower your overall stress levels.
It creates a self-reinforcing, vicious cycle within the abdomen. It sustains its own elevated cortisol environment, which makes it incredibly stubborn to lose if you're only focusing on calorie counting and ignoring your nervous system.
Wow. So if cortisol is constantly keeping us on high alert, that naturally bleeds into another foundational pillar of our health. Which brings us to the second massive driver of visceral fat, our sleep cycles.
Yes, sleep is huge.
The sources show that sleep deprivation doesn't just make you gain weight. It fundamentally dictates where your body decides to store that weight.
The University of Chicago conducted a landmark study on this very mechanism. They took healthy adults and restricted them to just 5.5 hours of sleep per night for a couple of weeks.
Just 5.5 hours, which honestly is what a lot of people get normally.
Sad, but true. So they used advanced imaging like CT scans to see exactly what was happening inside their bodies. Now, the participants did gain a little bit of weight overall.
Okay.
But the critical finding was that the proportion of fat gained specifically in the deep visceral region increased by a dramatic 11%, while subcutaneous fat barely changed.
Missing just a few hours of sleep actually physically relocates fat to your organs. How does the body even make that decision?
Well, it operates through a dual mechanism. First, sleep loss elevates your evening cortisol, which we just established is a direct trigger for that visceral fat bouncer.
Right.
Second, poor sleep completely disrupts the delicate balance of two critical hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin.
Okay, ghrelin and leptin.
Ghrelin is the hormone that stimulates your appetite. When you don't sleep, ghrelin spikes. You feel ravenous, and specifically for quick energy.
And leptin.
Leptin is the hormone that signals fullness to your brain. When you don't sleep, leptin plummets.
Yes.
Your brain never gets the message that you have had enough food.
There is a story in the sources about a school administrator named Marcus that perfectly illustrates this trap.
Oh yeah, poor Marcus.
Marcus wasn't hugely overweight, but his blood sugar was slowly creeping up into the pre-diabetic range, and he was thoroughly confused because he thought he was doing okay with his diet.
But his lifestyle was the issue.
Exactly. He was sleeping maybe 5 hours a night, and because of his busy schedule, he was eating his largest, heaviest meal after 9 p.m.
Marcus's situation highlights a critical concept in human health, which is circadian biology. Our bodies are not static machines that burn fuel the same way 24 hours a day.
Right, they change based on the time.
They operate on an ancient biological clock. From an evolutionary standpoint, your body is highly insulin sensitive in the morning. It expects to process fuel during daylight hours when you are active and foraging.
That makes sense.
But as the sun goes down and evening approaches, your insulin sensitivity naturally drops, preparing your body for rest and repair, not digestion.
So what does that circadian rhythm actually mean for the food Marcus is eating?
It means that if Marcus eats a balanced plate of food at noon, his body processes it efficiently. The energy goes into his muscles and is used up.
Okay.
If he eats that exact same plate of food at 9 p.m., his tired, sleep-deprived, insulin-resistant body doesn't know what to do with that sudden influx of energy.
Because it's ready for sleep.
Exactly. Because of his circadian disruption, the body panics. It treats that late-night meal as an emergency, and it preferentially shunts those calories directly into visceral fat storage.
The exact same calories, but a completely different biological destination just based on the clock. And when we are exhausted from sleeping 5 hours a night and our cortisol is elevated from stress, we rarely crave broccoli or a balanced salad.
Never.
We crave fast, immediate energy. We crave sugar.
Always. Your brain is demanding quick fuel to keep the engine running. But, just like with meal timing, the body does not treat all calories equally. And this brings us to the unique role of fructose.
Right, fructose. Driver number 3. We find this in table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, sodas, and even seemingly healthy packaged fruit juices.
Yeah.
What is fructose doing inside the body that makes it so uniquely harmful for visceral fat?
It all comes down to liver metabolism. When you consume glucose, which is the sugar that comes from breaking down complex carbohydrates like potatoes or oats, that glucose enters your bloodstream and is distributed to cells all over your entire body.
So it's spread out.
Right. Your leg muscles use it, your heart uses it, your brain uses it, the load is shared. But fructose is structurally different. Fructose is processed almost exclusively in the liver.
Oh, so when I drink a large soda or, a heavily sweetened coffee drink, all of that sugar hits one single organ at the exact same time.
Exactly. It creates a massive metabolic traffic jam. When you flood the liver with liquid fructose, the liver simply cannot process it all at once for energy. So it hits a biological panic button and initiates a process called de novo lipogenesis.
De novo lipogenesis, which literally translates to making new fat from scratch.
That's precisely it. The liver rapidly converts that overwhelming flood of fructose directly into fat droplets. And because this conversion is happening right there in the liver, that newly minted fat doesn't travel far.
It just stays there.
It is deposited right there deep in the visceral cavity, wrapping around the organs.
I have to bring up a massive point of confusion here because for decades, the standard dietary advice we all heard was simply eat low fat to lose belly fat.
Oh, I know.
Just avoid dietary fat, eat plenty of grains, and you'll be fine. The research in these sources suggests that dogma was actually pointing us in the complete wrong direction.
The science has moved far beyond that simplistic calorie model. A major turning point was the 2004 DIRECT trial and subsequent research that followed.
Right.
The DIRECT trial was a long-term intervention that compared different diets, and it clearly showed that low-fat diets, heavy in carbohydrates, often performed worse for metabolic health than diets higher in healthy fats, but lower in refined carbs.
Right, because of insulin?
Exactly. It all comes back to insulin. Visceral fat cells are incredibly responsive to insulin spikes. Refined grains, white flour, and liquid sugars cause massive, rapid spikes in your blood sugar, which forces your pancreas to release a flood of insulin.
And the fat cells react to that.
Because visceral fat is so sensitive to insulin, those specific carbohydrates act like a potent growth hormone for organ fat.
There was a specific study from UC Davis in the sources that absolutely blew my mind regarding this. They took two groups of people and had them drink sweetened beverages for 10 weeks.
This study is fascinating.
One group drank beverages sweetened with pure fructose, the other with pure glucose. Both groups consumed the exact same number of excess calories.
And the result perfectly illustrates that liver traffic jam. The group consuming the glucose-sweetened drinks gained a bit of subcutaneous fat, the pinchable kind.
Okay.
But the group consuming the fructose-sweetened drinks built significantly more visceral fat. Same exact calories in, but the chemical structure of the sugar dictated that it become the dangerous hidden organ fat.
That is wild. So we have thoroughly mapped out the biology of the problem here. Visceral fat is an active, hormone-producing tissue driven by a modern trifecta.
The stress, sleep, and sugar trifecta.
Yeah. The stress-cortisol loop hijacking our fat storage, circadian sleep deprivation confusing our hunger hormones, and the liver flooding effects of liquid fructose. The obvious question now is, how do we systematically dismantle it?
Well, the very first step is abandoning the quick-fix fitness myths that just don't align with human biology.
Oh, yes. The classic gym myth. I hear people say all the time, I'm going to start doing 100 crunches a day to burn this belly fat off.
Right.
It is such a common belief.
It is incredibly common and completely biologically impossible.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Spot reduction, trying to burn fat from one specific area by exercising the muscle underneath it, does not work. Visceral fat cannot be targeted through abdominal crunches.
So what are you actually doing when you do 100 crunches?
If you do 100 crunches a day without changing the hormonal inputs of stress, sleep, and sugar, all you are doing is building a very strong, thick layer of abdominal muscle underneath the dangerous fat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that actually pushes the visceral fat outward, making your stomach look bigger and feeling firmer, which is often incredibly frustrating for people trying to get healthier.
That sounds awful, so crunches won't save us. Instead of focusing on mechanical movement, we need to look at biological antidotes, right? The foods and habits that specifically disrupt these three drivers. Let's start with the stress loop.
Okay, so the dietary approach here isn't about starving yourself or crash dieting. It's about shifting the chemical signals your body receives. First, consider leafy greens like spinach, kale, and Swiss chard.
Okay, white greens.
These are incredibly rich in magnesium. Research shows that magnesium acts almost like a biological chill pill for your nervous system.
The chill pill. I like that.
It helps regulate the HPA axis, the system that controls your stress response, which specifically helps lower systemic cortisol levels, physically breaking that fat storage loop.
So leafy greens act as a buffer against the stress driver. What about the constant inflammation, those cytokines we talked about earlier?
For the inflammation, we look to fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines. The high levels of omega-3 fatty acids in these foods don't just sit there. They actively interfere with the biological pathways that produce those inflammatory cytokines.
So they fight it directly.
Right. Omega-3s physically cut the inflammation loop, dampening the alarm signals that sustain visceral fat growth.
That makes sense. And what about managing the massive blood sugar spikes that force the liver to create new fat?
That is where legumes shine. Lentils, chickpeas, black beans. They are packed with soluble fiber.
Soluble fiber.
Soluble fiber acts like a sponge in your digestive tract. When you eat it, it forms a gel that physically slows down the absorption of sugars into your bloodstream.
So it prevents the spike.
Exactly. By stretching out that absorption, it completely blunts the rapid insulin spike. Without that massive surge of insulin, the visceral fat cells never get the chemical growth signal they need to expand.
I also noticed green tea mentioned heavily in the clinical literature within our sources.
Yes, green tea is a fascinating tool. It contains a specific antioxidant compound called EGCG.
Epigallocatechin gallate, I think.
You got it. Multiple studies show that EGCG inhibits an enzyme that normally breaks down your body's natural fat-burning hormones.
Oh, so it keeps the fat burning going longer.
Exactly. By keeping those signals active for longer, Regular consumption of plain green tea is associated with measurable reductions in waist circumference, directly targeting the visceral stores.
I want to highlight Priya's story from the sources because it's so relatable and proves you don't need a massive, punishing overhaul to see real cellular changes.
Priya's case is a great example.
She was a 34-year-old project manager. She was chronically stressed, sleeping maybe 6 hours a night, relying on sweet coffee syrups to get through the afternoon, and eating a lot of white rice late at night. Her blood pressure was climbing, and she felt awful.
And when she decided to make a change, she didn't adopt an extreme restrictive diet. She worked with her biology instead of fighting it.
She made small, targeted shifts. She swapped the sugary afternoon coffee drinks for water and plain green tea to stop flooding her liver with fructose.
Such a simple change.
Yeah. She forced herself to go to bed just 30 minutes earlier to gently guide her circadian rhythm back into balance. And she added just 10 minutes of dedicated breathing exercises after her workday to actively lower her evening cortisol.
And the results were amazing.
4 months later, without starvation or endless crunches, her blood pressure was down, energy returned, and her waistline had significantly shrunk.
Priya's outcome brings up a deeply practical point for anyone listening who wants to understand their own body better. How do you track this invisible tissue? You have to skip the bathroom scale. The scale is a terrible tool for this.
Because the scale can't differentiate between muscle, water, subcutaneous fat, and visceral fat.
Exactly. Visceral fat is actually relatively light in weight compared to the dense muscle tissue,
Yeah.
but it is incredibly destructive to your metabolic health. The best, most accessible tool you have is a simple, inexpensive tape measure.
Just a tape measure.
Measure horizontally around your belly button. Extensive research shows that a waist circumference measurement above 80 centimeters for women and above 94 centimeters for men is a strong biological signal of hidden metabolic risk.
Good to know. And beyond the tape measure, the sources highlight one specific lifestyle intervention that shifts the entire equation, which is resistance training.
Resistance training, whether using weights or just your own body weight, is vital. When you build muscle, you create a metabolic sink for the food you eat.
A metabolic sink.
Yeah, the more muscle tissue you have, the more places your body has to safely store incoming glucose for energy. Because your muscles are soaking up the glucose, your pancreas doesn't need to release as much insulin.
Which starves the fat.
Exactly. Lowering your overall insulin levels literally starves the visceral fat cells of the environment they need to thrive.
So recapping this deep dive into the hidden world inside our abdomens, visceral fat isn't just extra padding from eating too much. It is a living, metabolically active, hormone-producing tissue.
That's the main takeaway.
It's built and sustained by the modern life trifecta. Chronic stress keeping the fat storage bouncer employed, circadian sleep disruption confusing your hunger and fullness cues, and liquid sugars causing a metabolic traffic jam that forces the liver to manufacture new fat from scratch.
But the incredibly hopeful, empowering flip side to all of this complex biology is its reversibility.
That's the good news.
Because visceral fat is so highly active and deeply integrated into your bloodstream, it's actually much faster to respond to positive lifestyle changes than regular subcutaneous fat.
Oh, really?
It will shrink faster than the fat you can pinch on your arm, provided you start giving your body the right chemical signals through rest, stress management, and mindful eating.
It's entirely about shifting those chemical signals, one small habit at a time. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the hidden epidemic of visceral fat. We hope this exploration has completely changed how you view the connection between your daily lifestyle choices and what's happening deep inside your own body. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought from the sources to mull over as you go about your day. We established that visceral fat acts as its own endocrine organ, right?
Yes, it does.
It is entirely capable of sending inflammatory chemical signals directly across the blood-brain barrier, interfering with your mood, your energy, and your insulin. So, you have to ask yourself, the next time you are lying in bed at 11 p.m., stressed from a long day, exhausted from a lack of sleep, and you suddenly feel this intense, undeniable craving for late-night sugar, is that actually your conscious thought? Or is it your hidden fat actively communicating with your brain, demanding to be fed? Keep an eye on that invisible roommate. Until next time.